everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are going to be reacting to a new video from Anthony Padilla that is all about asexuality. And from what I can tell, this is part of a new format they're trying out. And the idea of it is basically it's a roundtable discussion where you have people from previous videos that Anthony has done all together, plus some new faces, and then they talk about assumptions that people make about that community or that group, and then they discuss whether or not it's like true, their reactions to it. And I feel like this is similar to some of the other formats of videos that places like Jubilee or Cut make, but knowing Anthony and his channel, I think he generally does a really good job, and I feel like this could be done in a very positive way because his more one-on-one style he does is usually really good, even with groups he doesn't necessarily really understand or know anything about. So I'm hopeful this will be a good new format to explore and talk about various subjects. And you know what? I have a few I like to request being made, but we'll talk about that later. I think what I want to do here, this is a long video. It's almost half an hour, and y'all know it can be verbose at the best of times. So what I'm going to try to do is like cut down the video from Anthony's channel, or maybe like speed it up or something. I don't really know quite yet what I'm gonna do, but we're gonna try to make it so we're not here for an hour. If you want to watch the full video, I have it linked down below. If you want to check it out, please do. Anthony does really good stuff about all different groups of people, and I highly recommend you check out their work if you haven't already. And I think with that being said, let's talk about asexuality, because as someone who is polyamorous and kinky and ace all at the same time, I tend to have some differing opinions compared to a few of my asexual compatriots. So let's see what they have to say and go ahead and get started.
Asexuality is a disorder.
That's the core of every psychiatric disorder. It has to distress you or the people around you.
And I feel like it distresses other people more than me.
Yeah. Which I'm not upset by it, so it's not a disorder, and I'm not like hurting other people around me.
But sometimes it's just like society tells you that you need to be this way, and like once you like can tune out those messages, it's like, hey, actually I'm fine not feeling sexual attraction.
I think it gets brought up as it being some kind of a medical side effect a lot too, like low libido, which isn't even necessarily applicable to every asexual. It's not.
Libido is different.
It's a different thing.
Yeah.
There's so many different spectrums, and people who aren't asexual can have a low libido.
In the past, I've heard people say like, oh, I haven't had sex in months. I'm so asexual. How does that make y'all feel when you hear something like that?
People taking like real orientations and like the people saying, I'm so OCD, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Or like, I'm so depressed. Or the big one is like people like, I'm so traumatized, like, by that color shirt.
A lot of people confuse asexual with celibacy, which is just the choice to not have sex.
Right.
That is a different thing.
I think it's like fine if people are questioning that if they're asexual or not. It's like, oh, is this an identity? Does this apply to me? There's no way to like be asexual other than to not feel the attraction. It's like you can have sex, you can not have sex, you can have had sex once or 0 times or however many times, and that doesn't take away from being asexual. Like,
Okay, so on this first one, I don't really have anything to add here that hasn't already been said. Like, asexuality just like factually isn't a disorder. There is something that I think some people will conflate or confuse with asexuality, and that is hypoactive sexual desire disorder. Quite the mouthful there. And we don't really have a lot of studies about this, but on the very limited research I have seen on this topic, there are some key differences between that disorder and asexuality, especially with regards to physical desire, fantasy landscapes, things like that. They're not the same thing. Being ace is not the same thing as being broken, and this is just like a tale as old as time. Probably a good one to start with, but definitely something I hope we move past eventually at some point. Now, the next thing here, the like, ooh, I'm so asexual because like I've been celibate or I haven't like had any for a while. I've never heard that before. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. Like, maybe that's happening somewhere. I just have not ever come across this before. And I think really, if anything, this reveals how for a lot of people they conflate asexuality and a low sex drive. Like if you're in a period of time where you have a low sex drive, people might start thinking or make jokes about, hey, I'm asexual or I feel ace. And, maybe that could be the start of some meaningful exploratory thinking, but yeah, maybe let's not make this a thing. I don't think it's quite a thing in the way that like people joke about being like bipolar, for example, but let's not add this one to the list, please. We had enough with like the zany Target t-shirts in years past. I don't want to have more of that. Thank you.
Asexual people don't have to come out.
I actually I've been back and forth on it before, because after I came out in the original interview with Anthony, I objectively made things harder for myself. And at first I was like, what did I even do this for? Because it could have been something, I go on dates and I tell them what my comfort level is with sex, and that's all it needs to be. I don't need to like identify a way. I don't need to tell them what it is. That only causes confusion all the time anyway. I don't feel that way anymore about it. It has made things challenging in my life, just being this way. But I'm very glad that I came out. I'm glad that I told people, and so many people got to hear it, because it validated so many people's experiences.
Yeah, that's really the important part for me. I'm part of organizing a meetup group called Ace Los Angeles. And so we meet on Zoom or in person once a month. But because I can come out, that like helps other people learn, hey, asexuality like exists. It's real.
The subject of being out as an ace person is definitely complicated. I feel like the background thinking behind this question is maybe not necessarily the process of coming out as an ace person, but the idea that as an ace person, you don't have to come out because your identity is invisible and like no one cares who you're not bringing home for Christmas or who you're not taking home for Thanksgiving. It's a much bigger deal to finally come around to, bringing your roommate who's really been your live-in girlfriend for a couple of years and then like announcing that at the holiday gathering versus, being ace and not having to deal with that, because if you're ace and you're not dating, you don't have to, like, you're not going to get that same kind of questioning maybe, but that doesn't mean that ace people shouldn't come out or don't have a coming out process at all, because especially if you grew up in a religious environment or just a cultural environment where there are expectations of marriage and kids and taking a certain life path, yes, some ace people will take that path, but not all will. And maybe when you're in college and you get into your 20s and then you're getting into your 30s, and your parents, maybe especially your grandparents, whoever, they're going to start being like, hey, like, I found you this person, doing the whole like my big fat Greek wedding thing where it's like, we're going to set you up on some dates, try to find you a nice young person to settle down with. And what about those grandbabies, eh? And like, if your life plan as an ace person doesn't include that, you might at some point especially make the decision to be like, hey, like, this dream you have for me isn't going to happen. Like, I want to have friends. I want to do this and that. I want to focus on my career. Having this other thing you want me to have, having this romantic or sexual life partner, that's not in the cards for me. So maybe just focus on one of the cousins instead. Maybe we could just do that. Families are hard, and I think being out around them can be very difficult. I would say for me, I have definitely chosen more the path that one person was talking about like, I'm not going to put it in a dating profile. I am just going to talk about it like in person on a date, set expectations, because people don't even really know what being ace is. And so to have it on a profile without any kind of context that people maybe aren't going to see or read, like, that doesn't really help anything. And I've certainly found that, like, I generally don't say that I'm ace on a profile. I will say that I'm polyamorous and that I'm kinky, but asexuality, I find, even more than those two things, requires a lot of in-person conversation to be like, so this is my life and this is what I'm here for and this is what I'm looking for in a relationship. And people unfortunately can be nasty about it. But I personally don't really take any stock in like being out. Like, I'm just sort of like, I'm me and I'm okay with me being me. I don't really like need other people in my life to like validate that. Like, I'm fine just having that be something I know about myself and not having it be like a discussion point, but that's me. And for other people, it's gonna be totally different. But anyways, I am rambling. Let's move on to talk about the next topic here.
Asexuals don't date.
If a relationship happens, like I'm interested in someone, they're mutually interested in me, then I'd be interested in pursuing to see what happens. But like, I have so many things to do during the day. I don't need to just be like dating lots of people or like finding someone.
I think that's a good way of going about it anyway. It's better if someone kind of, you find them in your life, like doing your daily things, that you're living your life for yourself. Someone else might come along, but you're not actively going out looking for something. I do hope to find a life partner. That's something that I have like as a goal. I want to find the person to spend my life with.
I don't think I'm really looking for a life partner. I honestly think that I'd be happiest just like on my own, and then just like building relationships with family and friends outside, because I'm someone who needs my space anyways. And I mean, if you take the sexual component out, that's what friendships are.
Okay, so I think the next question they do will cover this more, but I do want to briefly say that I sort of do feel like the odd man out of this group of ace people. Like, I definitely enjoy dating. I'm a very romantically driven person. I didn't really get into dating when I was younger in like an intentional way. Like, I wasn't boy crazy. It wasn't like, trying to get a boyfriend as soon as possible or anything. I kind of just stumbled into it as a teenager and went like, oh, like people want to date me. And then other people want to date me again after I have a breakup. Isn't that nice? And I kind of just like went with it essentially. And now as an adult, I definitely like do want to keep dating, and I enjoy dating, and ace people can enjoy dating and want to date and want to be romantic. I think we'll probably cover this more, but being asexual does not mean the same thing as being aro ace, or not being able to love people, or not enjoying like that level of intimacy and like being cold. Like, a lot of things wrapped up in that one, but yeah.
Asexual people don't want to be romantic.
So I think people really confuse romantic feelings and sexual feelings, and those are two separate things that are often entangled, but they don't have to be the same. And so asexual is about not feeling the sexual component, the sexual attraction, versus aromantic is not feeling a romantic attraction. And it's like, you can be romantically attracted to people without being sexually attracted to people. You can also be sexually attracted to people without feeling any romantic intentions.
It happens a lot.
Yeah, I was like, that's in media and life. Like,
Yeah, for me, that's why in the beginning I was like asexual and aromantic. Every once in a while I sort of have, I guess, maybe romantic feelings, but it's one of those things that's very like subtle and easy to forget.
I'm on like the other end of that spectrum where I'm like, I'm a huge romantic and I love romance. I have crushes probably 3 times a day. The thing that makes me ever want to get to the point of wanting to have sex with someone is getting to know them pretty intimately and like very closely and deeply. And I'm not going to do it before I get there.
I get crushes on people a lot. I feel like it's that initial infatuation that really hits me. And I think I do experience like romantic feelings mostly towards women, which is why I call myself an ace lesbian. My romantic attraction towards women and then my lack of sexual attraction are like two separate things.
Would you probably say that asexual is more the physical, sexual side, and then romantic is more of the emotional side?
I think it's definitely where like people who are allosexual, they have like that natural drive, where like asexual people can still want to have sex and even can still have like a drive to have sex, but it's not like a natural, I don't know what it is. I don't know what that feeling is.
I've heard it described like a sex drive is like being hungry, and then like sexual attraction is like being hungry for something specific. If I was in a relationship with someone allosexual, like, I mean, between doing the dishes and having sex, like I really hate doing the dishes.
They're like just as bad. Honestly, you're not missing anything. There's like
Okay, but I really hate doing the dishes.
Oh, it depends. Yeah, it depends.
I've been in relationships where I felt the way you felt, where it was like more of a task more often, and it didn't seem like they cared that I wasn't as into it as them. But then I've been in relationships where they like fully were okay with me taking my time and made me feel comfortable, and then things are fun. Then it's really fun to explore and have that with a person, for me.
And I think this really shows how much asexual people can vary in their opinions, because I am definitely a really big romance person, like I was just talking about. Like, I enjoy dating and getting to know people in that way, and like I enjoy dating and romance so much that I am polyamorous and I date multiple people. So there you go. Like, the ace perspective can vary a lot. And people do definitely conflate romance and sex together, and they are right. A lot of people, like, they don't ever really stop to question like romantic attraction or romantic desires outside of sex, because for a lot of people that are not ace, those two things are like pretty closely fused together. Whereas for a lot of ace and aro folk, like we have very different perspectives about one over the other. Like there's lots of people that are aromantic that are like any flavor of sexual orientation, and vice versa is also true with ace people. And you can be like, people get like, how can you be an ace lesbian? Like that's like, I can predict that now. You can be romantically attracted to women or whatever gender and not feel a sexual attraction towards them. Again, hard for some people to understand, but it is in fact a thing regardless of whether or not you personally understand it. Other thing here, I don't love when ace people, I feel like the perception from non-ace people, when they hear ace people talk about oh, it's like doing the dishes, I don't really like putting things down that way, or talking about sex being this dirty, gross chore you have to go out of your way to do. I think that's a valid perspective to have, but I don't like harping on that. So it's that's a key component of ace identity is oh, sex is doing the dishes for me. It's not some people yes feel that way, and I kind of get the sense that the one that has the shorter brown bi-toned hair, I don't know how to describe it, the ombre maybe, they seem to again be maybe more like me in our perspective on things and our history of things, and maybe not so much on the doing dishes side of things. I don't depending on the context, it can feel like doing dishes, but as I've gotten older, I feel I've been more drawn to move away from describing it that way, because I feel it can be a little bit off-putting, especially to non-ace people. Before I get bogged down into any super heavy topics, let's move on to the next question.
Asexual people are repulsed or morally against sex.
To me, it's a neutral task. It's not the best. It's a little bit awkward and a little bit gross and messy, but no worse than cleaning the toilet. You know what I mean?
Super sexy. Cleaning the toilet.
It is gross.
Yeah. If you take all the emotions and endorphins and dopamine out, it's not that great of a task. It's repetitive, it's boring, it's kind of gross. There's sweaty and other things there that are all sticky, and it's not great.
I have to admit at this point, I'm not really vibing with Purple Shirt here. I don't know how I felt about them in the original episode that Anthony did. I don't remember what they talked about, but they definitely have this mentality that a lot of ace people I know do, and I'm just not, it's not me. I don't really personally get it. Again, it's that thing I was just talking about where, yes, you can be personally repulsed by sex as an ace person. You can very strongly dislike it, but to make generalized statements that you're comparing it to cleaning a dirty bathroom and cleaning a toilet specifically, and then going further than that and then making statements well, we just removed all the dopamine and endorphins and hormones and feelings from it and emotions from it or whatever, then it wouldn't be a very fun task. It would be super repetitive and boring. And it's if you did that with anything, it would be a boring, repetitive task. If you have a favorite video game, if you removed the dopamine reward you got from playing it, and you just looked at it as a gameplay loop, that gameplay loop would get very boring very quickly. And as somebody that is a sex-neutral, asexual person that does engage in this kind of thing in relationships on occasion, it can be emotionally intimate and rewarding, and it's not even just that, I don't know, it's we're not, people don't do this just because they're looking for a dopamine hit or something, and that's all they're going after, and this is something that I really learned being in the kink community, especially, and being around nude bodies in a neutral way, and seeing people engage in things is you can, to a certain extent, willingly choose to see sex as this gross, disgusting, bad thing, and kind of internalize shame around sex and internalize feelings of grossness about it, because that can be a protective ward kind of from feeling you have to engage in something that you don't really want to engage in. But I found it very powerful as an ace person when I moved from being more sex repulsed into being sex neutral. It was because I learned I could see bodies as a neutral thing, that I didn't have to be disgusted by the whole thing and think about it as being dirty and smelly and gross and sweaty and yada yada. I could soften my perspective on it and like make it a safe place to explore like bodily functions basically, without it being this like horrible, like medically horrific disaster all of the time. And not everyone's going to do that or be able to do that. Like sex repulsion is definitely something that is very innate to a lot of people and is not changeable, but I also think a lot of it has to do with society's kind of like laser beam focus on like controlling sex and like it being gross and like, you know, using that as like an axis for control around people's expression and desire sexually, like because, you know, it's supposed to be gross and bad and horrible and awful and yada yada, unless you're doing it in a marriage in a very precise way that you're like supposed to be doing. Anyways, complicated thoughts about how people relate to sex and like feelings around it being like gross and negative and like, I don't know, I feel like it's easy to take that mentality into a physical relationship and then put that on a partner and then kind of communicate to a partner that their bodies are gross and that their bodies are doing gross things that are disgusting, and like that kind of shame is like not great for a lot of relationships. And it's nice to be able to have those maybe kind of parts that would normally be perceived as disgusting like be embraced and be accepted and like not be judged like so harshly all the time. But you know, that's me, that's my opinion, that's my perspective. Every ace person is different.
I think it's all about finding someone compatible where like the amount everyone's happy with, and there are compromises in relationships. Some people, I think they've tried to weaponize compromise, where when I hadn't had sex yet and I wasn't ready yet with any partner, I heard that I was being a ridiculous virgin, that I was making it a bigger deal than it was. I needed to get it over with. I wasn't compromising because he was willing to do everything and I wasn't really willing to do anything. And as much as I am sex positive, there are still going to be times where I'm like, I might rather watch a movie or like use this time in doing something else. But I think also a lot of people in allosexual relationships, it's fine to want sex in a relationship. I feel like that's an okay thing to be looking for. But I don't know how much people are looking into the future of if you have a partner you're with for life, there will be periods of time where you don't get to have sex with them. If they are sick, they become disabled. I'm worried about dating someone allosexual because that might become a problem later.
It's really hard for them to understand how people can like not have that urge, because it's, if you just think of it as if you're straight, you know, or gay, the gender that you're not interested in, we just feel that way about both. I don't really have any emotions associated with it at all. It's just like a neutral task. So I understand it, but I don't feel it myself.
I also want to highlight here how I feel like, remember the hint from like just a little bit ago? Now I feel like we've had a much bigger look at coercion being a problem for ace people, and we kind of just like fully glossed over it and moved on to a different point because, oh, I want to talk about me again. Like, maybe this is an editing thing, but I feel like no one really recognized or held space for this person who is, like, sharing this, like, personal story that seemed to be very upsetting. And, like, I just want to recognize that as an ace person, coercion can be a big problem in relationships, because people feel entitled to pressure you, and that like, oh, well, you know, if it would make me happy, why don't you just do this? Like, why don't you like me? I thought you liked me. And we don't really have a lot of studies about this, but it's something that occurs in relationships very frequently with asexual people, and you know, it deserves to be treated with sympathy and respect when somebody shares an experience like that. I kind of feel like it just went over everybody's heads, and like, I'm sorry, like, I feel like that was a pain point that was shared and then, like, not treated with kindness. And, you know, hey, like, I see you, I recognize you, that was vulnerable to share that, and, you know, thank you for being vulnerable. But moving on to the next point.
Like, this is a horrible thing to say to my high school boyfriend. I told him, I was like, I don't understand why cheating is bad. And obviously he didn't really react that well to that.
I can imagine.
Looking back, I'm like, wow, but what I meant was like, I didn't understand why it was so hurtful. Not that I was gonna do it. We have more than one friend. Why is it such a big deal to have more than one partner?
I'm like sort of the inverse, where it's like, I don't understand why people cheat, because it's like, you need sex so badly that you're gonna like betray your partner and like lie to them or like hide an affair. I was like, just break up.
Yeah,
like,
why are you here?
Or like be in an open relationship. Like,
Or just stay home and do it yourself.
So, a conversation about cheating. I was not expecting that. That was not on my asexuality roundtable bingo card. And I do have some thoughts about it. Like, yeah, mentioning casually to your boyfriend that you don't, like, think cheating is a big deal or you don't get why people care about it, like, yeah, that's probably not going to go super well. I could have told you that for sure. But I think that cheating and like why people have a problem with it can be difficult to understand if you have never had a physically intimate relationship before. I think not that it's impossible to understand, but it can be slightly more difficult. But usually the problem with cheating for people is not actually the physical act of it. Like, that does matter to a certain extent, but what matters a lot more is the betrayal and the damage that happens to trust in the relationship, and the fact that you would put your own temporary, sometimes impulsive happiness over the safety of your partner, over like your feelings towards them. You would break the boundaries and commitments you have made and understood with each other for the sake of like a dalliance, basically. Or that if you had lost feelings, you wouldn't be honest about them, or if you had feelings towards somebody else, you wouldn't be honest about them. And the damage to trust that happens in relationships because of that is sometimes insurmountable. Like, the fact that we have that feeling maybe about physical intimacy and maybe not other aspects of like boundary breaking in a relationship is related to people caring about sex quite a lot, but the part that is damaging is not like necessarily the physical aspect itself, but like how you have this understood boundary in a relationship of exclusivity, and then that being broken and not being openly talked about, and not being something that somebody like even gets an opportunity to like give consent for, and then just, you know, it's just like not treating your partner with respect. But moving on.
People are only asexual because of trauma.
It would kind of be like someone saying like, oh, he had a bad relationship with a woman, so then he turned gay. Like, that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
No, that isn't a requirement anywhere else.
Maybe they'll be like less interested in dating, but it doesn't change their orientation.
And it doesn't matter if someone did experience trauma and they identify as it. That's how they identify.
Yeah.
That's their business.
Yeah. If you are allosexual, you'll know whether you're into an act or somebody or not. But if you're asexual, you don't have that contrast of like, this is what I want and don't want. It's all just kind of neutral. So you sometimes try things, oh, maybe I'll like it if I try it.
Yeah, a lot of us try things to see if, like, there's a reason why we're asexual, and it usually just, it is that way.
Yeah.
We're born that way.
No is an answer, regardless of if it's your sexual orientation or you're just not into it. People are like, oh, like, but you haven't tried sex. That's silly. Like, people can experience sexual attraction. Like, they know they experience sexual attraction without having had sex.
I will say, I have met people that identify as being trauma-induced asexuals before, or some similar label to that, and I don't love it. I feel like if it was any other orientation, people would make a really big deal about it. Like, imagine you just came up with a label of like, I'm a trauma-induced lesbian because my last boyfriend was so bad, he turned me gay. Like, that is already a negative stereotype. Why would we add on more to that? And why would asexuality be the one label that like, oh, if you're traumatized, you become this thing? Like, I'm not, but at the end of the day, really though, I don't get to decide like what other people come up with for labels. I don't really want to police that. I don't know what goes on in other people's hearts and minds. If people genuinely feel like something caused them to become asexual, who am I to say whether or not that's true? Like, I can have my perspective and my opinion about myself. I can say generally what is common or accepted, but then, like, there's a lot of nuance, you know? And just, like, I just can't be bothered to care and police things that much. And, like, as I was saying earlier, getting more to the point of trauma, I think that there can be a correlation between trauma and asexuality, but the correlation isn't trauma making people ace. It is a lot of ace people experience trauma in their relationships because coercion and pressure is a foregone conclusion, right? You're depriving your partner. They deserve certain things. They have certain needs, and therefore it's fine for them to extract those things from you. And, you know, you should just be happy because it makes your partner happy. And, like, Lord, the toxic rhetoric around this is real, and, you know, that's, I think, the direction trauma more tends to go in with ace people, sadly. But
Asexual people are just too young and confused to understand their sexuality.
I do think it's funny when people say you're too young to know you're asexual. It's like, I'm telling you I don't want to have sex right now and you have a problem.
Yeah.
As a child, I think that one's funny.
And it's like, how old do you have to be to know, like, you're straight?
I've always been pretty strong, but also having this doubt in the back of my mind, is this like an emotional issue? Like, would I feel differently if I was in like a committed long-term relationship with someone I really like trusted and loved? It was one of those things I had never tried. I dated and stuff here and there throughout my 20s, but I've never been in like a fully, like long-term, fully committed romantic relationship. So I did that like a couple years ago with someone who I had known really well. We were friends. And so I embarked on this like fully committed romantic relationship with a sexual component. I don't know how else to put that. And it was one of those things I thought maybe once I tried it, I'd be more into it. And the whole like, 6 to 9 months, I felt the same about sex. And so, yeah, it's definitely an orientation.
I think in the popular imagination, people that identify as ace are all like trendy TikTok teenagers or people from Tumblr that were just like collecting identities to like have the most of them to seem cool and different and special. And if you look at the history of asexuality, maybe it doesn't have the length of public history that something like, the gay men's community has, but we do have a history, right? Like going back to the early days of the AVEN forums, for example, like the people that were starting that and were on that were early adopters, they're in their 40s and 50s now. Like it's not just like trendy teenagers trying to come up with a new label for the fact they're a prude. Some people maybe could use it that way, but I think by and large, ace people come in all different ranges of ages and anything else. And I think especially because asexuality wasn't really a known label, I think for a long time people identified as like anything but that because they didn't really have the language for it. And we do have people that are older that are out as ace people. Like there's literally a channel that's called like Ace Dad Advice, and so like they're out there, they're giving advice, they're talking about their experiences. So no, like not all ace people are young, okay? That's just silly.
Asexual people can only date other asexuals.
I have never dated someone else that was asexual. Because of all people being so different, it might not be compatible for a lot of different reasons. So I don't necessarily think it's like we should encourage everyone to just date within like that closed pool.
Just being asexual, that doesn't guarantee compatibility in any way. Like it might be a foundational, like something you share in common, and that's good to have in a relationship. That's not going to make something work. If someone's dating profile says that they're asexual, I was like, oh, like maybe we might be able to have that starting point conversation. Like, because you still have to explain like what are your boundaries with like physical intimacy, regardless of if you're both asexual or even if you're not asexual, you still have that conversation.
Everyone should have that conversation.
They say only about 1% of people are asexual. If you're an asexual person who falls in love or has feelings for someone, it's most likely not going to be another asexual. No one should ever feel like they have to compromise sexually so they can fit in or be normal. I think the only thing is that if you choose to because it's worth it to you.
Yeah.
This is another one of those like, wait, people really think this kind of questions? No. So I have been on multiple dating apps. I have moved multiple times. Well, on those dating apps, I have seen thousands of dating profiles at this point across multiple different dating apps. And in that time, I can recall about like 3 people that identified as being on the ace spectrum. One of them was ace and only looking for friends, not dating. And then 2 other people were demisexual. And one of them was my dance instructor. So if we could only date other ace people, a lot of us would be very lonely for a long period of time, especially if we only want to date people in person, in real life, not long distance. Ace people deserve to have happiness. And like, it's not impossible for an ace person and a non-ace person to have a happy, healthy relationship. There just has to be very clear expectations up front. And I think the main thing that people do wrong in relationships in general is they don't like state their boundaries clearly. And so like, yeah, if you are not stating certain things up front, that might make someone feel deceived or put off or upset. But, you can state up front, hey, I'm ace, I'm this, I'm that, so for me that means this is like my relationship to sexual activity or to sexuality more broadly. And like, you will find people that are comfortable with that. But, it is possible to make compromise and to not have certain expectations of like, we have to do this because like a romantic relationship has to be this way, you know? So ace and ally relationships, they work. I've had plenty of them.
Asexuals aren't queer.
Like those are separate identities, and you can come out as one or not, or the other. And so I'm actually out to my family as just gay because they understand what gay means. Like I don't have to explain what asexuality is, that it exists, that it means this. It helps me feel like more part of the queer community in some sense because I have these multiple identities. I know some people are like, oh, like I'm ace, but I don't know if I really like belong to the queer community, which like, no, you do. They all do.
I don't have like a label for my romantic attraction. I've only dated men so far, but I'm not closed off to it. And I think it's because I'm asexual. Like learning about sex at first with men was already like foreign territory and I had to figure it all out. And so it wouldn't be different if I found a woman that I felt romantically attracted to and then have to start all over, but would be willing to potentially, I'm like open to that. Asexual at the beginning didn't feel like enough. You get called like just a straight person wanting to be special and you're not really part of the LGBT community. They'll be like, you don't get treated different because you're asexual, but we do.
You know, I think individual ace people are going to relate to queerness differently. Some people are definitely going to feel very queer because they are ace, even if they're not, you know, they're not trans, they're not like biromantic or whatever, you know, they can still feel queer. And I know other people that are ace that feel much more like being asexual is different and separate, and they don't really relate to being queer at all. I know for myself, I was much more that way when I was younger because of my interactions on like my college campus with like the LGBT plus community and not really feeling super like I was a part of that and not having the inclusion and representation maybe that I needed compared to like the kink community felt like super welcoming for me personally, even compared to the LGBT plus community. So being queer is something that's very variable for different asexual people, but on a more community-wide level, I will say that the A in LGBTQIA+ stands for asexual. And, you know, that's my thought about that, okay? So it can be, but it's very individual about whether or not somebody feels a kinship with that label or with that experience.
Only women are asexual.
It's hard because like people assume that just like men want sex, and so if you like fall out of that, then you're like seen as abnormal. I've known men who have been like forced to go to strip clubs against their wills because they're like, oh, like you'll enjoy it, and they're like, no, I really don't want to be here.
Yeah.
Or they assume like a man is gay if they're not talking about having a partner. It's like, oh, like maybe you're hiding a partner that is a man, and so that's why you're not like engaging in these like conversations.
It's such a male stereotype, like it's like of the societal like male identity of like going after sex and women and chicks.
It is.
Obviously, like, yeah, I'm not a man, but like,
Yeah.
I've heard stuff.
Yeah.
And I have friends that are they're demisexual or aspectrum. And I can only feel for them how much harder it is for them to be accepted in their identity. Because I feel like it's almost easier that people are like women that aren't into sex. Okay.
All of the ace people I have met that I know in real life are men. Some of them are married. Some of them have kids. Being asexual doesn't mean you can't be a man or have a family or have kids or get married or anything like that. And I feel like there's a very similar phenomena within the kink community in terms of like submissive representation online. Like if you look online, the predominant people that are making content about asexuality tend to be like women and femme folk. And in the kink community, a lot of the online content creators, a lot of people really know, like especially educators, tend to be like submissives and tend to be women. But that doesn't mean that's like the whole community or what predominates there. Like anyone can be ace, anyone can be kinky, and I really, really hope that maybe in future iterations of something like this, we have some men at the table, because the male experience of being ace is very unique and comes up, you know, and butts heads with a lot of problems with like the patriarchy and like toxic masculinity in a way that is different from how ace people that are non-binary or femme or women have to deal with. And I feel like that is a subject that is very much worth exploring. But in the meantime, I will say, asexual men exist, they are valid, they are real, and I wish that they had more representation in a more public setting.
What do you wish you knew before you came out?
Well, I wish I'd known it was an option and that I didn't have to doubt my feelings, that I didn't have to like prove to myself and other people that my feelings were valid.
I would just tell myself that, hey, asexuality exists and it's an option for you and it is you.
I wish I waited longer, I think, to start dating. I've dated a lot. I have my experience. And the first few relationships were really, really awful ones. And I wish I would have just not felt like I had to put myself through that.
Yeah, I feel like asexual, we sometimes have trouble trusting ourselves because of the doubt. And I just would have told my younger self to just follow how you feel and not how you think you should feel.
Trust yourself, believe in the feelings or the lack of feelings.
Because we will have other people telling us what we should be feeling or what we should do or what, but I do wish I trusted myself.
I think the thing that I wish I knew is that I wish I had known that there were more ways of being asexual. I thought it was the same as like being gay or being a lesbian, where like there's typically anyways, a very like clear-cut understanding of like this is a thing that it means. I didn't realize that there was like this diversity of experiences under the ace umbrella that had different terms, had different labels. And I was first introduced to asexuality through the lens of like aro ace being the norm and being the standard. So I thought for years that I couldn't be asexual because I wasn't aro ace. And like if I would have known that like sex neutrality was an option, for example, that maybe would have sped up a few things, and maybe I didn't have to go through that kind of like experimental discovery process I did when I was younger, and like maybe things would have turned out differently for me. But, you know, who knows? Can't really say. But, yeah, that's what I would say. Is I wish I would have maybe understood the diversity a little bit more than I had realized that there was.
Is there any good ace representation in media?
I have heard of some, but I haven't seen the shows fully. I know there's an asexual character in BoJack Horseman that I've heard is good.
The director of Ace LA consulted on that. And in it, they included like him going to an ace meetup, and then we had people come to our ace meetups like, oh, I saw this on BoJack Horseman, and then I looked it up and it was a real thing, and then they went, and it's like people like exploring their asexuality might not even know it's an option until they see it on TV, and it's like, hey, this is real, and like other people also feel this way.
That's great, because especially it's like one that's not talked about a whole lot, or it's talked about entirely wrong. I was part of a comic book series where I was in charge of writing and creating the character that I played. She's asexual. So anywhere that I'll have the opportunity to be a character in something, I've made the statement they're always all going to be asexual.
Yeah.
Whatever that means for them, if they have sex, they don't have sex. But I'm just saying it before I even have other characters. They're all ace.
I think definitely Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory.
Oh.
I think obviously they had him have it later on, which at first I hated it, but now like after this conversation, I'm like, you know what? I'm okay with it because it shows that how much of a spectrum asexuality is.
And I just want to do a quick shout out here for the Ace Couple podcast. I don't really watch a lot of media, so I don't really know of anything with ace representation in it myself, but the Ace Couple podcast has a lot of episodes where they review different shows and movies and talk about representation a lot. So if you want to know some good and some not so good representation for asexuality, I would definitely check out their podcast. They are great people. I've been on the show before as well, and they are where I go if I want to have the 411 on asexual media. Does anyone know what the 411 is something is anymore? Have I just dated myself? Oh no, I'm dating myself. Oh god. Oh god. Hey, abort. Going on to the next question here. Let's talk about that one.
Asexuals are not sexy.
Asexuality it's about the internal attraction part. It's not about the behaviors or the way you dress or anything like that.
Yeah, it's like one part of myself. I like fashion a lot, and that one I've actually found to be a conflict with my sexuality in a weird way, where people are like, you're not supposed to dress sexy or revealing or, God forbid, fishnets. And I mean, that's a horrible can of worms to open, to say the way you dress implies something about what you do. So I know like a lot of the asexual community on Tumblr, they're very kinky asexuals also. And I think it's because they're so detached from sexual attraction that they'll do it for whatever reason if it feels good, and they're very into it. And that is probably something people wouldn't expect either.
There is a big like ace and kink community. As like kink doesn't have to be sexual necessarily.
Also true.
Yeah.
Ace people can be any way they want to be. They can be sexy, they can be erotic, they can be whatever, okay? Not all ace people are going to be wearing baggy clothing and sweatpants, and wearing those things doesn't mean you're ace. It could mean you really like early Billie Eilish, you know? It doesn't have to mean anything in particular. And I just feel like people have such weird relationships with this, but then also, like, here's another like counterexample to like prove the point, is like, you know how in professional domination, it's mostly men that are submitting to women? Did you know that like 9 out of every 10, this is a very unprofessional, this isn't a real study, this is just me in my experience, 9 out of every 10 professional dominants I know are queer women. They're not attracted to men, or not only attracted to men. So like if a professional dominant who is a lesbian in real life can dominate men for money, for their profession, by and large. I think an ace person who doesn't want to bone all the time can also, like, wear different clothing that, like, maybe reveal some skin occasionally. I think that should probably just be fine. So, yeah, you don't have to be frumpy to be ace, and, you know, I mean, look at all this shoulder. Avert your Puritan eyes. I am seducing all of the men folk. The shoulders, their weakness. Like, I didn't realize that was gonna cause me to lose my ace card because I revealed the unrevealable, you know? Anyways, I think we have one more question here, so let's go on to that one.
Asexuals are cold and emotionless.
You touched upon that with, like, the
Yeah.
stereotype of, like, oh, they're
Oh,
just, like,
yeah.
super brainy, like,
Or they just
all
can't get laid.
logic.
I think that people would assume most asexual people aren't interested in, like, any forms of touching either, but touching can be very innocent and also not need to lead anywhere. I like physical touch a lot. I
Yeah.
like holding hands and I like kissing.
There is a sense of detachment from the quote unquote normal sexual
Mm-hmm.
attraction and sometimes even the romantic feelings. But that doesn't mean that the person is totally emotionally disconnected as a
Yeah,
person
yeah.
just because they're disconnected from this one thing.
I almost feel more connected because it's a choice that I'm making and I'm, like, very conscious and aware of it.
Or you can't, you can't feel love like everyone else.
Yeah.
That's an assumption. Like if you don't have sexual attraction, like you can't feel love. I feel like that's a very narrow way to look at love.
Yeah, and intimacy can look different for all of us
Right.
too.
Ah, yes, this whole idea. Yeah, no, being ace doesn't mean that you're robotic or that you don't experience emotions or don't care about other people. I really feel like this perception comes from the fact that a lot of people and people that, like, make media tend to, like, collapse a bunch of things together. Like, being ace is the same thing as being autistic and is the same thing as not having sex appeal. It's the same thing as being a nerd and, like, not being able to talk to people. And, like, all these different things get squished down and, like, they get just stuck together. Like, they're all the same thing. And it's like, no, like, first of all, you don't really understand, like, what being neurodivergent means anyways. And, like, now you're tacking all this other stuff onto it and, like, it just causes so many problems. Maybe one other thing going on here is, like, people feel like, you know, oh my god, if I didn't have this experience of attraction, you know, I would die. Like, I wouldn't know what to do with myself. Like, who would I be if I didn't experience attraction? And so therefore, because you don't have this big thing that's, like, so important for your emotions and so important for your relationships, like, therefore, if you didn't have that, you would just be, like, dead inside and have no emotions. And, like, ace people have a robust inner landscape and friendships and connections and hobbies and all that same stuff. Like, I love my dog more than any person I've ever met loves their dog. Not to brag, of course. So, like, clearly I can experience emotions. But, yeah, I mean, it's a problem. People just make stereotypes about ace people. But hopefully this conversation will help folk have a more robust understanding of the complexity that goes along with being asexual. And I don't really know if I have any big, like, wrap-up thoughts for this. I know this is, like, a newer series and they are still working out the kinks, but I do hope in the future they maybe revisit some of their old past favorites, like maybe, like, Otherkin would be a good one, or especially for me and my personal interest, I would really love them to bring back, like, the dominatrixes again. Like, I love Justine Cross and Daddy Only. Like, have them back on again, please, Anthony. I want to see that. Or, like, maybe we could even just talk about kinksters, you know, just, like, in general, non-professionals. That would also be good. Pie in the sky dream there. But anyways, I would love to know y'all's thoughts about this one in a comment down below. If you did enjoy this, you want to see more from me, please do subscribe because I make videos twice a week about all sorts of different kink and BDSM related topics. And finally, if you want to support what I do, the best way you can support me is through Patreon. The link to that will be down below. If you do already support me over there, thank you so, so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.